Welcome to Mosaic Church, and thank you for joining us here online. To prepare for today's message, we encourage you to utilize the Mosaic Cincinnati app. There you can view the message notes, put in prayer requests, and so much more. Enjoy the message.
We're going to start a new series called The Power of Grace today, and I am so excited. This is probably one of my favorite topics to talk about ever, and we're just going to look at all kinds of angles and aspects of grace during this month. And so today the title is Grace Sees. Grace Sees. But sometimes you wake up and you think, man, today's just going to be like every other day. It's just going to, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to do my thing. Or maybe you're in school and you go to school and you come home and you eat dinner and you just think, oh, it's just going to be a normal day like every other day. And then it's not. Have you ever had one of those days? One of our youth this past week on Wednesday, anybody remember those storms that woke you up Wednesday morning? Anybody, can you remember back that far? It's just a few days ago, but sometimes I'm like, what did I do yesterday? Like, I don't even remember. But last Wednesday, there's some storms, and so one of our youth, he's in one of the welding program at Live Oaks, and so he was headed to work that morning, and he was driving along. It was like 5:45 in the morning. Man, props to this kid for getting up and getting after it, right? And so as he's driving along, he's going about 30 miles an hour, and those storms are picking up, and a tree literally falls on his car while he's driving. Rips the roof off. Can you imagine? And he walks away without a scratch. Like, the providence and protection of God in his life is just amazing. Because if he would have been going like 1 mile an hour faster or slower, man, it could have been a way different story. But man, sometimes you wake up and something happens and it's like, this day is not going to be like every other day, right? You think it's going to be, and then it's not. It's amazing. He came to youth on Wednesday night, just walked in like normal, and it's like, no big deal. And he's like, oh yeah, a tree fell on me this morning. And I'm like, what? What? And it was raining so hard that as soon as it hit his car, he was wet and getting dumped on. And it's like just the shock of something like that happening, and then realizing I'm okay, and then realizing, everything's going to be okay. But sometimes when you think your day is going to be just like normal, it ends up not being normal at all. And today we're going to talk about a lady in the Bible who was just going about her daily business as if nothing was going to be new. And then her day got turned completely upside down by the grace of God. And so turn in your Bibles with me to John chapter 4. We're going to talk about the woman at the well today. And I guarantee you this woman did not see Jesus coming. As we get into this series, I just want to unpack one thought real quick before we get into the story today. I want to be really specific when we talk about the power of grace, that we are talking about the grace of God. God's grace has power. My grace for you, like I can have grace for you, right? Which is nice. That can be really kind and really great, and it can feel good for you, but honestly, at the end of the day and at the end of your life, my grace for you really does not matter. We worry so much these days about what everybody thinks and what everybody thinks about us and what we're doing and how we're living and all this kind of stuff. And while other people's approval of you might make you feel good, it won't save you. And so when we talk about the power of grace, in this series, we're specifically talking about the grace of a loving God who would send his one and only Son to die in your place on a cross, to pay the price for your sins, a debt that you could not pay. You didn't have the ability to pay. It's powerful. Mercy is not getting what we deserve. Have you ever been in a situation where you didn't get what you deserve? Maybe when you were a kid, you did something that man, mom and dad are going to come down on me for this, but you come in and by the grace and the mercy of God, they didn't do anything. Anybody have an experience like that? I know I did, man. Sometimes it's just like, whoo, I dodged a bullet that time. So mercy, it's not getting what you deserve, but grace is actually receiving something that you don't deserve. And so do you see the difference? Mercy is when I don't get what I did deserve. Grace is when I actually receive something that I didn't deserve. And many times we misinterpret grace as just like a general acceptance, right? Or a lackadaisical attitude that just means anything goes. Like, oh, I'll just have grace and whatever, happens, it's like, okay, no big deal. And many times we transfer these kind of thoughts onto God. But here's the truth. God meets you as you are, but because of his grace, you don't stay as you are. Why? Because you receive something from him. He gives something to you that you didn't have before and that you don't deserve. There's a difference. It's grace. You walk away with his goodness and his righteousness that you didn't have before. I love what Max Lucado says about grace. He says, grace is God as a heart surgeon. So just get the picture. God, he's a heart surgeon, and grace is like God as a heart surgeon. Cracking open your chest, removing your heart, poisoned as it was with pride and pain, and replacing it with his own. And rather than tell you to change, he creates the change. Do you clean up so he can accept you? No, he accepts you and begins cleaning you up. His dream isn't just to get you into heaven, but to get heaven into you. I love that picture. Because really, grace is not about what you've done or what you could do or anything like that. It's more about what God is giving you. And he's giving you the free gift of salvation through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Because if you could have fixed yourself already, you would have. And some of you that are searching today and you just showed up on a wing and a prayer, and you're just wondering, is there anything out there, and is God really real, and does Jesus really love me? Could he still change my life? Is there really still hope for me? Man, if you could have fixed yourself, if you could have filled that hole in your heart, you would have done it a long time ago. Right? We're all here today because we know there's more. There's more. And if you've experienced God's grace, you know that grace only fulfills its purpose when there's an acknowledgement that it's needed. The grace of God only fulfills its purpose in your life when there's an acknowledgement that it's needed. But the cool thing is that God's grace is in motion long before that. Long before you ever knew it, it was on the move. And that's the beauty of it. Grace doesn't just save you. It pursues you. It's patient towards you. It's God's predisposition towards you. And so we're going to unpack it during this series. And so here's just a few stages of the journey of grace that I want you to understand. First is the stage of discovery, and maybe this is where you're at today. And a lot can happen after or just during our discovery stage. It's maybe we first hear about Jesus and what he did and maybe what he can do, but we really don't know a lot about him. We don't understand how God works in our life. And we have ups and downs and doubt and stubbornness and rejection, and we wrestle with God and we hear things and there begins to be this understanding in our heart and a softening of our heart, and we're discovering more about God, but we really don't get it yet, right? We're just in that discovery stage. And in this stage, people ask a ton of questions. They ask, why would God fill in the blank, right? Maybe you remember that discovery stage in your life where you knew some things about God, you had heard some sermons or read some of the Bible, but you really didn't get it yet, and you're asking all these questions. Why in the world would God do what he does? And you might think, Jesus sounds okay, but I know some really crazy Christians. Anybody out there like that? And you might be asking yourselves questions like, why would I trust the Bible? Is it really God's word? Is it really relevant for me today? And so, and here's the biggest question of all, is Jesus really the only way? Or can I get to heaven? Can I have eternal life with God through some other means? Or does it have to be Jesus? And in the discovery stage, we're asking all these kinds of questions, but we're really just not sure. And it's in this stage that many hot button issues become hurdles for people. Well, can I follow Jesus but still do this? Or can I follow Jesus but keep my lifestyle? And we ask all these kind of questions, and we're trying to figure it out, and we're kicking the tires, and it's like, Jesus sounds really good, but I still have questions. And it's in this stage that a ton of confusion and distortion can happen. And then the next stage, at some point, man, you've learned about Jesus and you're discovering more and more all the time, and all of a sudden you have a realization. And this is the next stage in the journey. This is the moment or the culmination of many moments where a person becomes aware or convinced or convicted of the fact that they personally actually need the grace of God. That God has something that you need, like that you can't live without. For some people, this is a new thing. It's just out of nowhere. For others, they've wrestled for a long time with guilt and shame, and their conscience has been just nagging them for a long time. Or maybe they just thought they couldn't be forgiven. Either way, this realization moment, it's a waterfall moment when all the questions and all the doubts and all the confusion and all the wrestling with God give way to a beautiful surrender. Is there anybody here that's experienced that? Where you realized you needed Jesus and you gave your life to him. The next thing that happens in the journey is belief or faith. People say, well, I'm a person of faith, but man, it's a whole nother thing when you actually experience that moment where you say, Jesus, I believe in you for who you say you are. Not what the world says you are, but who you say you are. And this doesn't come because of all the questions were answered. Many people come to know Christ and all their questions aren't answered yet. Faith doesn't come just because your questions are answered. It comes because God's grace and the Holy Spirit has drawn you and you yielded to him. You yielded, you surrendered to him. How many of you know you can believe in a lot of things? You can be a person of faith, as this world calls it. You can be a spiritual person, whatever that means. But only the truth will set you free. That's what Jesus said. That's what Jesus said. And so don't think too much about these labels. Oh, I'm a person of faith, or I'm a spiritual person. No, it's when you believe the truth that you're actually set free. And what is the truth of the gospel? The truth of the gospel is that Jesus is the only way to heaven. This is an uncomfortable truth for our world today. We live in a pluralistic, inclusive society. And those words can, especially the word inclusive, it can mean a lot of good things, that we're including people. And that's a great thing. We need to include people. But inclusivity when it comes to spiritual things and the things of God and your salvation is not the right word. And this is the truth that will set you free, that you need Jesus. And without Jesus, all is lost. Jesus is the only way. And so when you come to that place where you believe and you have faith that you absolutely need Jesus Christ, you need him. It's an amazing time. And so you go through discovery and you have this realization moment, and you place your faith and your trust in Jesus as the only way to have a relationship with God. And then you follow him. That's the next stage. And I love how Eugene Peterson puts it. He calls it a long obedience in the same direction. Isn't that a really cool way to think about it? That, man, I'm just going to keep being obedient to Jesus for as long as I'm able in the same direction towards him. I'm going to spend the rest of my life honoring the one who showed me amazing grace. And so this is what the progression looks like. But man, it can happen in a moment. It can take a while. And wherever you are on your journey of grace, I want to encourage you that this is the right place for you to learn about Jesus, to kick the tires, to figure it out, to ask your questions, to wrestle through the confusion and the doubt and all of that. This is the right place. But it's God's grace that makes the difference in your life. And so the woman in our story today that we're going to look at was in a really tough place in her journey. She probably wasn't even looking for answers. Has that ever happened to you? You weren't even looking and God just shows up on your doorstep. Not only was she a part of a people group that was despised by the Jews, she was even outcast by her own people. You see, she was coming to get water at the well alone in the middle of the day. The only plausible reason for this is because she didn't want to be around everyone else. Have you ever just made a lot of horrible decisions in life? Or maybe just one big bad decision? And because of that one bad decision, you just wanted to isolate and not see anybody, like maybe forever? Anybody? That's where she was at. Nobody was showing her grace. And so she was just like, it's better to just be alone and do my business when no one else is around and just be by myself. And so the first thing that we see in this story today is that grace sees you. Grace sees you. John chapter 4, verse 4 through 10, let's read it together. It says, he had to go through Samaria on the way. He had to go through Samaria on the way. Now we know that a lot of Jews didn't go through Samaria on the way, that they would take a roundabout route and avoid that route so as to not come in contact with the Samaritans. That was just the culture of the day between the Jews and the Samaritans. But Jesus, he had to go because he had an appointment that only he knew about. And so eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well at noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water." Man, let me tell you today that being seen and being noticed is a powerful, powerful thing. He was weary and he still saw the woman. So much of the time we think that God doesn't have time for me. He won't love me because of what I've done and the choices that I've made. And because my life doesn't line up with this perfect version of whatever I think, a Christian should look like, God probably just doesn't want anything to do with me anymore. But Jesus came and saw her, saw this woman. And not only that, he asked her to help him. Grace sees you. Grace sees you. Grace sees a person despite that person's behavior. Jesus still sees your potential. He sees possibilities. He sees how he created you. He sees your original design. And all the bad choices in the world could not make him not see you. He still sees you. Man, I love what Jesus said. He said, "If you only knew." Think about that statement. And remember this journey of discovery that we were talking about? And all the while, remember, grace is in motion long before we acknowledge that we need it. And so all through that journey of discovery, God is like, here I am. Here I am. I'm here for you. I still see you. I see what's going on in your life. I see what you've done. I see what you're struggling with. I see all your doubts and all your questions and all your hurts. and I'm still here. If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to. Listen, Jesus' presence many times goes unnoticed and unacknowledged in our lives. And too many people, Christians and non-Christians alike, talk about Jesus like he's not in the room. But wherever you are in your journey, man, I just want you to hear and know today that when we talk about Jesus, we're talking about an omnipresent God, which means that he's everywhere at the same time, and he's here today. And because he rose from the grave, we have 24/7 access to the presence of God, right? He's here. And so when you talk about Jesus and you think about Jesus, man, if you only knew that he's right here. He's in your presence. He sees you. He's with you. He always sees. We live much of the time like he's not here, right? We do. We make decisions and we do things and as if he just doesn't see. But he's in the room. He sees you and he's intimately involved in your life. And many times I think he's just thinking to himself, man, if you only knew. And man, if we could just live in the light of the fact that he sees us and what he can do for us, it's a life-changing thing. And then another thing that we see in this passage is when is the last time you talked to somebody that you weren't supposed to talk to? When is the last time you went outside of your bubble, outside of your circle, outside of your sphere of influence and talked to somebody that maybe you weren't supposed to talk to? Jesus was tired, he was weary, but he seized the opportunity to make a difference in someone's life and sets an amazing example for us today. That he both sees us no matter where we're at in our journey, and he'll engage with people even if they're not on the I'm supposed to engage with them list, right? The second thing we see in this passage is that grace sees what you've done. And this, not in a creepy way, right? Not in like he's just like a creeper looking down on you. No, not at all. John 4:13-18. Let's unpack this. It says, Jesus replied, anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water I give them will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. Please, sir, the woman said, give me this water. Then I will never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water. Go and get your husband, Jesus told her. I don't have a husband, the woman replied. Jesus said, you're right. You don't have a husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth. So let's think about this. Jesus is offering her something infinitely better than she had, and she didn't get it. He's not talking about the water. He's talking about himself, that he is the living water, that he's going to fulfill that void in her life, the searching that, all the men that she's trying to find contentment in, all the relationships that she's trying to find meaning in. Jesus is trying to tell her, you're not going to find it there. You're going to find it in me. And in all the grace with all the grace that God has, God didn't just go there. He asks a question and he says, go get your husband. Right? And what does she do? She kind of skirts around the bush. Well, I don't have a husband. And then Jesus reveals that he knew more about her than she could have ever even imagined. And so when Jesus did this, I want you to understand that Jesus wasn't just reminding her of her failures. Because how many of you, when you come to God, that's kind of what you're afraid of. You're like, well, God's just going to remind me of all the ways I haven't measured up. Right? And that's what we're afraid of. We think, oh, God's just like that big guy in the sky. He's like that policeman in the clouds, and he's just waiting to smack me every time I mess up. But no. Jesus wasn't reminding her of her failures. He was reminding her of her pursuits and how empty and thirsty they had left her. Why? Because he was trying to show her that he had something better for her. So much of the time when God convicts us and confronts us about the things in our life that we need to change, what do? We put up the dukes. But instead, God is just showing her, hey, you can pursue that all day long. It's not going to quench the thirst. It's not going to fill that void in your heart. Those things that you think are going to make you happy and are going to fill you up, they just won't. She had gone from guy to guy to guy and not found contentment. And because Jesus is always present, he knew. Because he sees. He knew what she had done. But his grace, in his grace, he was leading her away from it. Why? Because his grace doesn't mean that he doesn't care what you do. His grace means that even though you've gone your own way, he's not given up on you, and he won't give up on you. Amen? Which leads us to our third point today. And this is the most powerful part. You know, God sees you. He sees what you've done. But number 3, grace still sees a new future. Grace still sees a new future. Her response to Jesus' amazing insight into her life, when basically Jesus read her mail, her response wasn't a request for forgiveness. Isn't that kind of funny? Her response was a question about a current societal tension. In other words, she was not ready to talk about the real issues in her life. How many of you, when God first started to work in your heart, you just weren't ready to talk about it? And it took a while. Anybody else besides me? It's like when God starts to shine a spotlight on something in your life, man, you're just not ready to talk about it yet. And the thing that blows me away more than anything else in this whole story is God's patience and his persistence. Because she wasn't ready to talk about it, so she responds with another question. It's almost like, ask God 20 questions at a time, right? And as only Jesus could, he lovingly brought her back to the real issue. And that's what God does in your life, because he still sees a new future. And he's not willing to just leave you alone. He's going to keep going after your heart to get down to the deeper issues. And so John 4:21-26, let's read. Jesus replied, "Believe me, dear woman, the time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him. For salvation comes through the Jews. But the time is coming, indeed it is here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him in that way. For God is spirit, so those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus told her, "I am the Messiah." It's amazing. It's amazing. Now, let's unpack it a little bit. Jesus answered, she had these questions about temple worship, like, why is the temple got to be in Jerusalem? Why can't it be here on Mount Gerizim where we worship? What's the deal? And once again, she's deflecting, she's redirecting. She doesn't want to talk about what's really going on in her life. And Jesus's response to her, it wasn't just about her, it was about the whole picture and how she fits into it. What does that tell us? It tells us that God sees you once again. He sees how you fit into the world and how it all fits together. You see, the Gentiles, which was basically anybody who wasn't a Jew, had synchronized the worship of God to their own culture. And so they had their own temple, they had their own place of worship that they went, because there's no way they're going to the temple in Jerusalem where the Jews worshiped. because they didn't get along. But not only did they worship God at this other temple, but they had brought their own pagan ideologies and other ways of worshiping into the mix. They had synchronized it. A synchronization, this is a term that they use a lot of times in missiology or in missions work. When you go into another culture and you present the gospel and people accept the gospel, but instead of putting behind their old ways of life, what do? They just mix it all together. Like, I'm going to serve Jesus, but I'm also going to keep worshiping these old gods that I used to worship. I'm going to keep these old customs that don't line up with the Word of God. I'm going to do things that don't really honor God, but I'm also going to worship God. You see, we see this all the time in our culture. We have pieces of God, but we live lifestyles of our own creation. In modern day, in today's day, this is the equivalent of saying, I'm very spiritual, but I don't acknowledge Jesus is the only way to heaven. I don't acknowledge that Jesus was really God. Or, I believe in Jesus. Oh, I love Jesus. He's a good guy. But I don't necessarily follow the Bible in all of my decisions. Is it getting real in here? You see, this is what Jesus was getting at. He's telling her, listen, you're asking all these questions about society and everything, but the fact is that God isn't looking for people who worship in a certain place or anything like that. He's worshiping people, or he's looking for people who will worship him authentically, who will give him all of their hearts and all of their lives and surrender themselves to his will. That's what he's looking for. He's looking for people who will go all in, who will surrender everything to Jesus, because Jesus surrendered everything for them. He's looking for people to worship him in spirit and in truth. You may not have known this, but Hindus, people who follow the Hindu faith, guess what? They say they love Jesus, but they love all the other gods as well. People who follow Islam, they say that Jesus was a prophet, but they don't acknowledge that he was God. Our country is chock full, and our world for that matter, our country is chock full of people who claim Christ's name, but don't submit to his lordship. In fact, those that claim the exclusivity of Christ, meaning that he's the only way to heaven, are mocked as closed-minded and narrow in their thinking. The woman did what so many of us do. When things get uncomfortable, we redirect. We ask another question. We distract. We avoid. We bring up other issues. Instead of getting to the heart of the matter, do I believe in Jesus for who he says he is? That he's the Messiah, that he's the one that came to take away all sin, that if I don't put my life under his grace and if I don't submit to his lordship, man, there's no hope for my life. And so Jesus is standing before her and he's saying, I see what's going on in your life. I've seen what you've done. But I also see that there's still a new future. Amen? Amen. I love what Chuck Swindoll says about this story. He said that Jesus appealed to her kindness and he asked her for a drink and she responded defensively. Jesus appealed to her curiosity, and he said, I'm the living water. And the woman responded sarcastically. Jesus appealed to her spiritual need and said he was the living water and that you'll never thirst again. And the woman focused only on physical needs. Jesus appealed to her personal interest. He said, go get your husband, right? And the woman responded with a half-truth. Jesus appealed to her conscience. He tells her the truth about her life and what she was really into. And the woman raised a controversial issue in society. Jesus appealed to her will. He said that you can worship now. The time is now. It's here now when you can worship me in spirit and in truth. And the woman tried to delay any decision and said, oh, I know the Messiah is coming someday. Right? And then Jesus is like, no, I'm here now. I'm here now. I'm right here. Jesus was patient and persistent through all of her questions. And every time that Jesus brought a new truth or appeal, she redirected. What are you going to do? What are you going to do once Jesus has answered every question that you have? What are you going to do when Jesus has been exceedingly patient and full of grace, and you're left with nothing but the truth of who he is, and he's standing there right in front of you? What are you going to do with him? Are you just going to ask more questions? Or are you just going to wait because there's still doubt in your heart? Are you just going to push him off again? Or are you going to remember that he sees you, that he knows what you've done, and he still sees a new future, and that the grace of God has the power to change your life? Amen? What are you going to do? What are you going to do with the grace of God? I don't know about you, but man, my life has been changed by the powerful grace of Jesus.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's message. We look forward to having you back next week.